And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com, and joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. Shayne's got a birthday coming up here.
I do.
Wish him happy birthday in the chat. So he's going to spend some time sitting back and watching the Combine this weekend, which we're going to talk about. Omar Khan just had his presser at the Combine. We're going to go over his comments, do our whole Combine primer. We'll go through each day, players to watch, things to look for as it pertains to the Steelers and in NFL draft in general. And then we're going to conclude today's show with some Matthew Stafford talks because something could potentially be in the works, whether it's the Steelers or not. He has been given permission to at least test and see what other teams would be willing to offer him in terms of a next contract. So let's kick things off, Shayne, with Omar Khan's comments today. Obviously, just address the media. On Tuesday morning, which he does annually at the NFL Combine. I think this gives us some really good insight. Obviously, he's not going to tip his hand on all the fine details about the Pittsburgh Steelers draft plans and everything they're going to do in the offseason. But we do get some insight as to where this team is heading, what they're looking for. And I want to start by talking about the quarterback position because Khan reiterated what we've heard early in the offseason, and that is from Art Rooney II, and that is the Steelers want to get either Justin Fields or Russell Wilson signed to an extension. I know that you're probably not thrilled about that. Fields is a respectable option. I think people would be okay with seeing what he can do for a full season. I've got mixed feelings about a guy that you benched after week 6, whether you felt like he was playing good or not. Is he going to have the confidence? Does the team have confidence in him to be that guy? But it looks like the Steelers are going to at least try to get one of these guys back for the 2025 season. We'd have to assume that that's probably who they're looking at to be their starter this year.
Yeah, I think obviously Fields needs to, at least in my opinion, be the answer to that question of who they bring back if they're going to bring one of them back, because he at least provides some amount of potential upside. We've talked about this plenty of times about, if the question is between these two, and that's the answer to who's going to be starting, I'm taking Fields 10 times out of 10 just because of that. And also I liked what I saw from him in the first 6 games, right? I know it wasn't perfect, but it was better than we've seen from him in the past, especially in terms of taking care of the football, making good decisions, throwing the ball with accuracy. Like, I think we saw more of those traits from him with the Steelers than we ever saw with him with the Bears. So I think there's an upward trajectory there still potentially. And hey, if we do end up bringing someone else, maybe a Matthew Stafford, we alluded to that earlier when we started the show, or whoever it might be, Fields is a great backup because he has rushing upside. He's a guy who's won games in this league, not at a high clip, but with the Steelers, he showed he could win. He is a great backup to have, if nothing else, but also could make a suitable starter, at least for the short term.
Yeah, Shayne, if it's between these two guys, it's Justin Fields or nothing.
Yeah,
because
to me,
we saw from week 7 through the playoffs of Russell Wilson got progressively worse throughout the season. And again, I will say for the 100th time, if it didn't work with a 36-year-old quarterback on a veteran minimum $1.2 million salary last year, why do you believe that it's going to work with a 37-year-old quarterback making more than 10 times that amount this season? I'm not buying into it. I think that Wilson is the guy we thought he was. He tried to trick us early on. And turns out, Shayne, when Wilson entered against the Jets and some of the cupcake teams that he played there, we thought those teams would be tougher than they were. And so his best performances actually came against teams that weren't all that good. I mean, he had a good game against Washington, and that was about it. Crumbled down the stretch, 14 points a game over the last 5. We've done all this before already, so I'm not going to rehash all of that. But it just doesn't make sense to do that. And again, my thought process here, Steelers can't stay in limbo. You got to go one direction or the other. You are either looking ahead to the future of this franchise, or you are going all in to win now. And Wilson, now we've got a 4-year sample, his last year in Seattle, 2 years in Denver, and this year in Pittsburgh. A 4-year sample of mediocre play is what you're getting out of him. That's not good enough. And so Khan seems to think that one of these quarterbacks will be here. One of these guys will get them to where they need to go in terms of postseason success. I'm not really buying it. And again, maybe they said this, and I think it was Alan Saunders that brought this up this time last year, where Khan said that he's got all the confidence in the world in Kenny Pickett. Apparently not, because Pickett got shipped out to Philadelphia shortly after that. And so just because Khan says something doesn't mean that the Steelers are necessarily going to follow what he says. So keep that in mind as well and take it with a grain of salt. But it's worth going over these comments here. The next one is about Najee Harris. The door is not closed on Harris, but reading between the lines here, Shayne, it sounds like his time in Pittsburgh is over. The Steelers are going to they're going to tag Jaylen Warren and Harris, and they're already looking at running backs, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But it does look like Harris is going to be on his way out.
Yeah, unfortunately for both the Steelers and him, it just never really fully worked out with him. I think that the thought process was sound until they realized that the offensive line, the offense simply wasn't good enough to justify adding running back to that room. And he's been the model of consistency. He's played in every snap you could ask him to play. He's been an effective player overall. Just never really brought the explosiveness that I think they're missing and really need to add now, like especially with Warren not being quite as explosive last year. You hope with injuries healing up and everything, he'll be closer to the player he was his first 2 years, but they need some youth and some juice in this backfield, and he does not provide either of those things at this point. And I do expect him to have success wherever he goes next, at least for the first year or two of whatever contract he signs, because I do think in the right scheme he could be more effective. But with Arthur Smith's offense, it just never was really a fit. And we kind of knew that going into the year that it might not be a fit. So,
yeah, and if this is the end for Najee, we wish him the best on his next team there.
Absolutely.
Again, the conversation comes back to, Shayne, if Najee had been a second-round pick instead of a first-round pick, we're not having all the conversations we had.
It does change.
It was a draft philosophy thing. He can't help that he was the one that was selected in the first round, even though the data suggests typically you don't do that. And maybe, and again, there's some recent examples of success. Bijan Robinson. Right. There are guys who do work out as first-round picks, but you need to be quite dynamic, and you need to be typically in a position where you don't have a lot of other gaping holes, or you can make an immediately electrifying impact for your team. Right. Came into a rough situation. So I do think that I think that it is in the best interest of both parties to move on at this point. I don't want to overpay for a running back that has a lot of tread off the tires already, and one who lacked a lot of explosive play ability, albeit he was the most durable back in the league over the last 4 years, which absolutely counts for something. But I think that we're going to see a parting here. I think it's going to be Jaylen Warren and some variation of a running back, rookie running back, or possibly even two. We'll mention some of those names here in just a second. George Pickens was the other topic of discussion here. The media was asked Khan about Pickens' status with the team. There's been a lot of trade talks and whispers out there, like maybe this guy could get the Deontay Johnson treatment based on the immaturity, the responses to the media we've seen over the last 3 years, like the on-field stuff, the lack of effort at times that shows up on film, I must say, when you go back and watch the All-22. I think of the Dallas Cowboys game on Sunday Night Football in Week 5. There were other examples. You go back to last year, 2023, the Colts game, where the blocking effort wasn't there at all. Jaylen Warren could have walked in for a touchdown and choose not to block. There are examples of things that showcased Pickens's immaturity and lack of development over the last few years with the Steelers, but Khan put that to rest, said he's part of the future, and he's part of their plans. And so it looks like, for all intents and purposes, George Pickens will be around this season.
Yeah, and I think there's two things to take away from this, and one is that beggars can't be choosers, right? Like you can't really jettison the only truly difference-making playmaker on your roster without a plan in place to do so. And right now, they don't. Now, that could change rapidly in the next 2 months as the draft rolls through and free agency rolls through. Maybe they add enough at the position where they do decide, is this somebody we want on the roster long-term? Do we think he can turn things around from a mental perspective? Because on the field, despite having his lapses, he is the most effective playmaker this team has. That's why I think Khan has to say this, whether he believes it or not. Not saying that he's lying about this. They very well could view him as the future star at the position, but they're not in a position right now to say anything different, frankly. They just aren't.
Yeah, no, it's true. And why would you say anything to the contrary.
Especially to a guy that
if you really do have interest in trading him still, you're not going to do anything to sabotage his trade value, obviously.
No.
And so we expected only good comments when he was asked about Pickens.
Right.
But the Steelers are aware of his issues. And Shayne, I think the problem is we're looking at it like this. If they don't trade Pickens this offseason, we might be looking at this as essentially now moving forward, like he's on a 1-year rental basis. And would the Steelers rather have that 1-year rental or maybe try to recoup a second? I think that would be rich, at least a third and change for Pickens via trade if you were to move him, because other teams obviously know about his issues as well. And there's a reason why he was off of teams' draft boards to begin with. And so we've seen that. I think that I wouldn't rule anything out. If I was Omar Khan, I certainly would be open to every and all ideas, and I would take every call from opposing teams if they had interest. Now, you said it, though. The Steelers, the beggars can't be choosers right now, and they are definitely beggars when it comes to the wide receiver position. And so I get wanting to not wanting to part with your best offensive asset right now. So I think that I would lean towards the unlikely category. You're talking about a trade for Pickens at this point, especially after Khan's comments to the media at the Combine. And then Broderick Jones, Shayne, a topic of discussion since he
will
first
it
came
ever end, Tommy? Will it ever end?
So frustrating. I posted, so if you haven't heard yet, Khan said that Broderick Jones, the plan is for him to be the left tackle this year. And I'm just sitting there scratching my head because I'm like, why was this not the plan, like, from the beginning? Like, I understand that Dan Moore was there. He was comfortable. But we just look at this, the whole Broderick Jones saga to begin his NFL career. Played left tackle in high school, played left tackle at Georgia. Steelers draft him to be a left tackle is what they said at the time. And what happens? Dan Moore doesn't want to move. He's comfortable at left tackle. The Steelers move him to right tackle when Chuks Okorafor, was in the doghouse. Now you're, as a rookie, right after the bye week, Broderick goes over to right tackle where he remains the rest of his rookie season. Year 2 comes along. It's like, all right, now we got that out of the way. Is he going to play left tackle now? No, still not. So now not only is Broderick playing right tackle, but Fautanu, who they just drafted in the first round, is also playing right tackle. So instead of kicking your former 4th round pick out of a job or making him weaning his way out, Dan Moore's job was safe, and it became a camp battle between Fautanu and Broderick Jones. So automatically, one of your first round picks isn't going to start. That guy ended up being Broderick Jones, but Fautanu got injured, and Broderick was right tackle by default here. And so now, year 3, you're finally going to move him back to left tackle, the position that you said at least that you drafted him to play all along. And Shayne, at this point, like, Broderick played over a year and a half of right tackle now. That's his most recent sample. Fautanu was a left tackle in college. Like, is this even the right decision this stage of his career?
The thing is, I have no idea. I don't know what the plan should be for him. I just know that I'd like it to stick to one thing. And I think we talked about this going into the season last year. It's like, I don't really care what position anyone plays as long as they play there and don't move anymore. Like, it's one thing to have versatility, right? And I understand that you might need to move guys around due to injuries, other things, but they have to have a position that they're actually playing. And then, if something happens, okay, we know you can play right tackle, or we know you can play guard, or whatever it is. But at this point, like, theoretically, Broderick Jones playing left tackle makes sense to me, right? Like, that's what he played in college, like we talked about. It's what he's supposed to play. He has the athleticism for it. But at the same time, Troy Fautanu, like, we didn't get to see enough of him to know if he can play right tackle. So now it's like, okay, well, what if Broderick Jones is actually just a better right tackle than Fautanu is? Fautanu is a better left tackle than him, and now we're going to flip-flop them again, like week 7 of the season or something. I just don't know what they're actually planning to do here at this point. Like, if they stick to this time, if they say Broderick's left tackle, he's not moving from that spot, Troy's going to play right tackle, we liked him at that spot in the summer or whatever, and they're just happy with that and that's what it's going to be, then fine. But if this flip-flops anymore, at this point, I don't even know what Broderick – I don't think Broderick knows what position he plays at this point. I don't think he ever knows what it's going to be week to week probably. It's a whole mess, and I know there's circumstances behind it somewhat, but I feel like this could have really been avoided if they were just like, hey, Dan, listen, learn right tackle or learn bench. Like, I hate to say that because he had a good first half of the season, kind of faltered down the stretch, and that's why we're not talking about him at this point. But like, that's kind of the reality of the NFL sometimes, right? Like, you draft these guys high, they have to play.
Yeah. And Shayne, I put this on social media, just yesterday, and I got a little pushback from it, but my response to this is very simple. It's like, you traded up to the 14th overall pick to draft this guy, which you said was to play left tackle. Dan Moore is not like this immovable, like, cornerstone piece that you have to have on the football field. I don't care if things were worse at the very beginning with Broderick. I don't care if Dan Moore was the better player in camp. This is the guy that you drafted. You don't stunt his learning curve to appease a guy who is going to be a one and done contract player on your team. It never made sense for me from the beginning. It is such a short-sighted approach by Mike Tomlin and the Steelers to do that. And instead of keeping him and having 2 years of left tackle experience under his belt right now, Broderick Jones has exactly like 3/4 of a game at left tackle. I think he played against, I think it was the Baltimore game as a rookie.
I think it was a
left tackle.
He looked pretty good.
And that's it. And that is it. And not only that, Shayne, and we have the conversation, and I know we've talked about this over the course of last year, but Fautanu and Broderick both kind of project as the left tackle type. But if one was better as a right tackle, I would almost think that it would be Broderick, because he's more of the mauling type player, where Fautanu was like the lightning feet, like, I will mirror you type pass protector, which was what he was best at Washington. I almost wonder if now they're getting it wrong again. Like, I hope that this is the right decision.
They probably are.
It does make you wonder. Like, I want to see both of these guys in that role, and I hope it goes well. I hope that this team knows what they're doing, but it's hard to say that growth hasn't been stunted with the decisions that they've made here. All right, Shayne, let's talk about the NFLPA report cards that just came out just about an hour or two before the show kicked off here. And if you recall last time, by the way, these are voted on by the players, over 1,600 NFL players, share their feedback in these surveys to create grades that are handed out to teams on the NFLPA report card, part of a way to keep teams accountable and to see how they're doing in comparison to the rest of the league here. And as you can guess, Steelers did not grade out very well. Just like last year, there were issues with ownership. There are issues with ownership again. Art Rooney too. And ownership received a grade of a D. The Steelers overall, when you comprise their overall grades, 28th out of 32 teams. This is not what you want to see from your team. Now, having said that, the Eagles ranked 22nd. They're the Super Bowl winners. And the Chiefs, I believe, ranked 26th. And so it's not a correlation between which teams have success. However, the players are clearly disgruntled. Like, we go down through these grades here, Shayne. Treatment of families, the Steelers players gave that a C-, good for 26th in the NFL. Some things like nutritionist, dietitian, C+. A locker room is a D. Training room is a C+. Weight room is a C+. I'm skipping over some here. There are some good ones. Head coach is an A. Mike Tomlin got an A. He's a player's coach.
Of course.
We all knew that.
Yeah.
But the collection of all these things gave the Steelers a 28th ranked facility and coaching breakdown, essentially, and ownership out of all 32. Not where you want to be. You compare that to a team like the Minnesota Vikings, who are like B+ to A+ and everything, like state-of-the-art facility, state-of-the-art training staff. The Steelers are falling behind in this department. Shayne, how much do you weigh into this? Like, how much do you think that this matters in terms of football success?
I think there is an element of it mattering for on-field success and for player development. And I think this is ultimately an indictment of Rooney. It is like, this is just the reality of being an owner in the NFL. Like, players have a standard that they expect. They expect to be treated a certain way. They expect to get the best care. They expect to get the best facilities. They expect to get the best food. And they should, because ultimately, if you're trying to win, every part of your organization that you can make excellent contributes to that, right? And like, obviously, the Chiefs not ranking very highly, that there's a reason why that doesn't matter for them, is because they have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid on their team. So that kind of helps mitigate that. They also have a better roster, all that stuff, but it does matter. These things can add up, and I think that they do kind of, I don't want to say that it limits this team, but it in some ways it probably does, right? Especially when it comes to facilities, right? Like, nutrition and strength coaching and all that stuff. Like that stuff matters for development of players. And it's not that this team hasn't developed players at all, but we just got done talking about Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu and the whole thing with them. Like they're probably not getting the best training that they could possibly get to keep flipping back and forth between different positions, right? If you're going to do that, you probably want to have the best coaching and training available. So it matters, I think, less than some people are going to say, but also more than fans who might just say, who cares about what the players think about stuff? Because those people are out there.
Yeah. And I thought the most interesting point overall here was the fact that Steelers players gave ownership a D. I'm not surprised by it based on previous report cards from the Steelers and the NFLPA. But like in terms of where they ranked in terms of building a competitive team roster, that was 22nd out of 32 teams in the NFL. So apparently Steelers players don't even think that the organization is doing a particularly good job with that. I wrote more about this on stillcurtain.com just recently here. You can go check that out. But any other comments, Shayne, that you want to make in terms of the NFLPA report cards?
Again, not really. Like none of them really surprised me that much, just from prior results and also just what we kind of know about this team. Unfortunately, when it comes to ownership and things like that, like they're truly skating by on reputation a lot of the time. I think, especially like from an outside perspective. But I think the players are letting us know that like it's great as it is playing for a team that has a history of the Steelers. They aren't getting with the times is probably the best way to describe it, and really every way, but including this type of thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when they're getting left behind by some of these other franchises, the players obviously notice that. And I think that where it could come into play potentially, Shayne, is like, all right, you're a high sought after free agent sitting out there. You've got your choice of teams. Like the money is similar, the contracts that they're offering you. Do you want to go where they're going to treat you really well? Or they're obviously where players give glowing reviews of how they treat your family. All the facilities are top of the state of the line. Or would you rather go to Pittsburgh where you're already having to deal with the elements in terms of weather and now a kind of a crappy facility? So maybe that's where it comes into play. I don't know. But it's worth noting at the very least.
Yeah. And I think one thing I want to note, like if for people who are really huge, like supporters of Tomlin keeping his job long-term and people who are not willing to criticize him much, if there's one thing you could say that he has going for him is it feels like every NFL player that's ever available is like, I'd love to play for Mike Tomlin. That might be the one draw that you could say that if you were to get rid of him, you might lose that element of it. And that could actually mean something in terms of roster construction. But that's the reality. Like outside of him and the Steelers' history and all that good stuff, like is there necessarily much bridging the gap between them and other teams right now in terms of trying to acquire players? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And his players certainly go to bat for Mike Tomlin any chance they get. Let's move on to TJ Watt contract talks now. Shayne, back in 2021, during the summer, this thing lingered on, and we wondered when there was going to get a resolution in a contract extension. TJ Watt came into the facility late in the preseason, basically said, yeah, give me the papers. I'm signing this. Let's do this thing. Became the highest paid edge rusher in the league. That is going to happen again. Now, if TJ Watt drags this out again, that remains to be seen. It's will be his camp's decision to see how long this thing holds off here. There's other guys that are going to get paid, and so if he's up first, that's going to dictate the market. And so we have a recent report from Tony Pauline, who says that Watt is going to make in the 35 to 37 million per year range. Currently, Shayne, out of all the NFL edge rushers, it is Nick Bosa who ranks at the top of the league. Back when he got his extension, I believe it was in 2022, 34 million per year. That's going to exceed those numbers pretty easily. And I know that Watt is in his 30s at this point. You can't do anything else. Like there's just no other choice here. He's the best player on your team. He's future Hall of Famer. You have to go where the market dictates, right?
Yeah, the problem with this ultimately is it's not about whether this gets done, because I think that it's very unlikely that they let him out the door really for the rest of his career, however long that lasts for, right? However, would I be willing to tell you that TJ is definitely going to be worth the contract going into his 30s, including what we kind of saw last year, where as impactful as he wasn't as good on a play-by-play basis as a pass rusher. I think the argument could be made that it probably won't be the best use of $37 million as far as value goes. But they don't really have a choice. Like you can't not pay TJ Watt and keep him on your team, especially with how much he means to this defense, and you want to try to maximize this winning window. He's going to be on the team, but people who see the contract are going to be able to justify saying, like, will this actually be the best value? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only option here, and it's not going to happen, I want to preface with that, is if you did like the Khalil Mack type trade, like the guys later in his career, we can get out of this and not have to pay all that. Because I agree with you, Shane. I certainly see a situation where it's like, yeah, TJ Watt is still a really good football player, but 37 million is 37 million. Like, that's a lot of money, and we're not quite getting our values worth out of that in the late stages of his career. Now, I hope that he keeps playing like a DPOY candidate. And if he does for the next 2-3 seasons,
then it doesn't matter.
Like, we're not going to have this discussion again. But this is a lot of money to invest. It's just, what are your options? If you're not going to trade Watt, and the Steelers certainly will not, they have no interest in trying to build for the future. Their focus is on now. And I understand. And people will want Watt to retire as a member of the Steelers. They're still one of the very few teams out there who have that loyalist mentality where I draft you. You are a really good football player. I want to keep you your entire career. They did it with Cam Hayward. They did it with Pouncey and DeCastro and Roethlisberger and a lot of the guys that have walked through this facility, Troy Polamalu. They want you to do that, especially if you are like this high profile, like legendary type figure. And the same will happen with Watt. Like, I would be floored if he ever plays anywhere else in the NFL, because the Steelers are going to ensure that doesn't happen. So because you have that mentality, you just have to pay what the market dictates. The only thing here, Shane, is you would hope that the Steelers be first to the race there, over a Myles Garrett, over other guys that could also get paid, because that could up the ante a little bit more even for Pittsburgh if they're not the first ones there. For what it's worth right now, Watt is currently fourth in the NFL in terms of average yearly salary, just over 28 million. That's behind Bosa, Josh Hines-Allen, and Brian Burns. We can absolutely expect that to change as soon as this next wave of edge rushers gets their contracts.
For sure.
All right, Shane, let's talk about NFL Combine meetings that the Steelers have had so far. And these are going to continue to flood in. Now, this is just from what we've seen out there on the Twitterverse. And the big one, obviously, is the Steelers have met with Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty. Shane, you're absolutely looking at a first-round pick here. I think that Jeanty is one of the best players in this draft class. Right now, I have him third overall as the overall player when you don't factor in value of position behind Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter in this class. Like, he's a really, really good running back prospect. Will he be there for the Steelers? That's a question. Mel Kiper just had his mock draft. He had him going 6th overall to the Raiders. The Steelers pick at 21. And so there are a lot of doubts whether he would even be on the board at this point. But I think the Steelers are at least doing their homework. Whether you agree with the philosophy of drafting that running back when you have so many needs and you're not a Super Bowl contender right now, they're going to at least do their homework on Jeanty. They spent a formal NFL Combine visit on him to see that, yes, if he falls to this pick and we have him graded as one of the best players in this class, would we take him there?
So I think I want to try to not give this too much like hype or anything like that, because I do think what this comes down to is I think the league is not 100% sure how high he can go. I think the overall like team by team situation could be, do we think he's going to go in the top 10? Do we think his floor is 12 at the Cowboys, or is it the Steelers at 20? Like, I think that's really what the Steelers are wondering themselves, is like, how likely is it that he could be there? Because we just got done talking about how Najee was not a good pick because of the value and the fact that we weren't ready to make a running back first round selection in terms of team building. And we still aren't now, but he's going to be one of the 3 to 5 best players in the class on most people's boards if you're just putting in talent. And if he's at 21, it's highly unlikely that anybody that's really honestly probably close to him in terms of overall talent is going to be on the board. And for a team that wants to run the football, who needs explosiveness in the backfield, it's a perfect fit. Now, would I do it if he's on the board? It'd be hard for me not to, I'll be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I also understand that, like, he probably won't be the most impactful player they could potentially add to a team that's trying to keep a winning window open. So it'd be tough, but you have to meet with him. If you think there's a chance he's going to be there, you have to do your homework on him.
Yeah, Shane, and normally I'm out. I'm right out on a first round running back, because I think that when you draft a player in the first round, you should be looking for a cornerstone that can be here for 10 plus seasons. That's the dream. And that's what everybody wants to shoot for, at least. Running backs, we know what their shelf life is like. It's not very long in the NFL. There's a lot of evidence that shows 26 years old and X amount of carries, you are falling off a cliff. Yeah. And obviously there's exceptions to that. Look at Derrick Henry, but he's just not human.
Yeah, Derrick's a little different.
Yeah, so, but even and the reason I say that, and that's not the only evidence that we have. We also have evidence that if you don't go to a good situation, then as good as you are as a running back, your impact's going to be not as big as it otherwise could be. And Saquon is the perfect example. Saquon Barkley had a couple of good years to begin his career, a 4-year stretch in the middle of that with the Giants where he was kind of a non-factor. I mean, he put up some good numbers, but the efficiency wasn't there. He was banged up. He was absolutely banged up. But then he goes to the Eagles and he looks like just completely dominant player, offensive player of the year, Super Bowl winner, all that stuff. Your situation matters. And so if you think you have the situation for it, if you think you are a contender, by all means, go for it. The running back oftentimes can put you over the hump. The problem is the Steelers aren't close to being at that hump yet, in my opinion. But having said that, Genty, without a doubt, will be the top player on my board at pick 21 if he's still there.
Right. Yeah.
So I would be very tempted to go that direction as well, and at least know that I'm getting a blue chip level player, even if he doesn't end up being a second contract guy, even if I do have other positional needs. This is like the sweet spot for me where I could get behind it. In most drafts, first round running back, not interested. I am at least intrigued by it this year, even if it goes against the philosophy that I would typically stand by, knowing that the Steelers are going to try to do everything they can to win now. Maybe you can just get a chip that can help you win now, like an Ashton Genty anyway. Preferably, I'd like to build for the future, but we'll see what comes of that. I think he's going to be off the board, Shane. I think
so too. I don't think there's any chance. And again, because this is what we did with Bijan Robinson. The entire draft process is like, where do you put him in the first round? There's so many needs. And then Gibbs and him go in the top 12. And it's like, all right, well, guess we don't know anything, And they both should have, by the way. So it's very, very clearly they should have gone where they went. So I don't expect that to happen. I don't think that it's going to be the Bijan thing where they talk about it happening and then it's going to end up happening. He's going to go somewhere in the top 12. I do think the Cowboys are his floor. It feels like, especially if they get a chance to draft him. I know that they've been much better about let's draft for the trenches. Let's draft players or don't worry about just because he's a great running back, whatever. I don't think Jerry Jones or the rest of the organization is going to be able to look themselves in the face and say, yeah, we don't want Ashton Genty on our football team. That just doesn't seem right to me. So I think that he'll be gone.
Yeah, I agree. Let's look at some of the other meetings here. They've had another notable running back, Ollie Gordon II. I know we got mixed reviews of him. Shane, I went back and with my film buddies, we watched all of Ollie Gordon from 2023. I thought it was
different player,
significantly better. Yes. I think that he would be one of those guys that would benefit from cutting a little bit of weight again, just trying to get a little bit quicker, a little bit more explosive again. But a big running back, frame wise, not all that different than Najee type frame. You're talking about a 6'1", 225, 230 pound back. It's clear the Steelers want to take advantage of a good running back class. I think just based on those two visits alone, based on Omar Khan's comments, he noted how strong this running back draft class is. And then after Gordon, Shane, a whole mess of defensive line formal visits, a whole mess of them, including Kenneth Grant, who is very much in play. Michigan nose tackle, 340 pounds at pick 21. If he's on the board there, The Steelers gave up 299 yards rushing against the Ravens in the playoff game. That would be really hard to pass on. Some other notable names there. Jordan Birch, Derek Harmon, I just noticed was recently added to that group as well. Harmon is in play at that pick. Some of these other guys we're looking at probably day 2 guys, but Birch would be like that, the big, long, like base defensive end, interior defensive line convert type player. Same with Elijah Roberts. Shamar Turner would be a defensive tackle, Alfred Collins. So there is a ton of interest in the defensive line class. That continues from the Senior Bowl. What we saw is Tomlin and Khan and Terrell Austin just make their way over to that D-line group, and that's where they planted themselves basically at the Senior Bowl. So not surprising to see.
No, and again, this is what I expect them to. The running back, defensive line, receiver, corner, like those are the ones I think they're going to spend the majority of their time at. I do think they're going to take a look at some of these quarterbacks that are going to be available on day 2 and beyond. Like that'll be some of the focus too. But I think those 4 positions, you have to spend a lot of your time on them at the combine, because not only is that where the talent is in some cases, but also where the needs are. And I think you want to have all of your needs squared away. So we'll see what free agency does, and maybe that focuses in on something. But it's also where the talent's going to be in this class. So like this is luckily a year where, because you always want to draft for best player available typically in the draft if you can do it, especially round 1, because you don't want to mess around with your first round pick and not get a great player. But this year, the talent's probably going to line up regardless of what position they attack as a need, where it actually is also the best player available potentially. So.
Yeah, Shane, I think there's a really good chance just this early in the process, looking ahead and saying at pick 21, a best player available situation could very well be a defensive lineman. And that might be, at least in the Steelers' mind, their biggest overall need. Now, obviously, we'll see what they do in free agency. We'll do a free agency primer down the road here a little bit as we prep for that. And how they spend money in free agency, obviously, will dictate how they view their biggest needs. But I think if you were to ask me right now, I think they view their biggest need as defensive line over wide receiver, over quarterback, because I think that they're going to stream a veteran again,
they have a plan,
whether you like it or not.
Of some
so,
kind.
Yes, at least they have
a right
yes, exactly. So keep an eye on that. We'll keep checking to see if more of these visits come in, and the reason why they're meeting so many of these defensive linemen right now. D-line and linebackers go first at the combine starting here tomorrow, Thursday. And we're going to give our primer for that in just a second. Shane, any comments, questions you want to get to before we move on?
There's a couple chats we had from, of course, our good friend R Barley 18 here. This is an interesting question, and I respect this thought process in general, but I do think it's a little different with Watt. Is Watt a legendary Steeler? What has he won? I don't care about individual stats. What success has he brought? Here's the thing. I understand that a lot of people view like legendary status through the lens of accomplishments, not necessarily your stats or what you did on the field, but what did you accomplish while you're out there? I can't for the life of me even begin to blame TJ Watt for any lack of success that the Steelers have had during his time in the league. So that's the first thing. And I understand if you view it through that lens, especially as a Steelers fan, especially if you've been a fan of this team for a very long time. The Super Bowl matters. The playoff success matters above all else. But if we're being honest with ourselves, do we really think that outside of the injuries, the untimely injuries where he's missed some playoff moments and stuff like that, has TJ Watt really been remotely close to this team's problem at any point in his career? I don't think I can say that.
Yeah, Shane, your situation matters in quarterback, and it especially matters if you are a non-quarterback. I don't personally, I do not think you should be held accountable for your lack of playoff success when Watt has been without a quarterback his whole career. He truly has. I mean, his rookie season was the only time he had a resemblance of a quarterback. And then since then, you're streaming Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. Nothing is good enough. If you trade Watt and Chris Jones, Watt's a 3-time Super Bowl champion right now. So it's hard to put the blame on TJ Watt when playoff success is largely a quarterback stat, and it's an overall like team. He can only do so much for that side of the ball. I mean, obviously the Steelers have had the number 1 defense with TJ Watt. They've had a top 3 defense twice with TJ Watt. So he has all the other accolades. He just doesn't have the playoff success. I hope he gets it. I hope he can get a Super Bowl, but I hope he at least gets a couple playoff wins in his career, because I know for a lot of people and Hall of Fame voters, even, that will leave a sour taste in their mouth, whether it's the right decision or not. maybe he won't be a first ballot Hall of Famer if he never gets a playoff win. Like it's that could be what we're looking at. It just depends on how you view things. I personally couldn't put the blame on him because I think in a lot of other teams and a lot of other situations, especially ones with quarterbacks, Watt has a lot more playoff success right now. Yeah. There's only so much you can do. And he didn't play the playoff game against the Bills last year. In the previous opportunity to play in the playoffs, he had a defensive touchdown against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Steelers were winning that game like quarter and a half through the game. They were up 7-0 because of that touchdown. Their offense couldn't score. So it's hard to put the blame on Watt for me personally.
For sure.
Keep the questions coming though, if you have anything else. Otherwise, Shayne, we'll get to our NFL Combine primer, what to watch, who to watch for. And let's start things right off here with Thursday's showing, which is going to be the defensive line and linebacker groups. There won't be a big interest for the Steelers in terms of the off-ball linebacker group this year, because that is one of the deeper positions on their team. They still have a decision to make with Cole Holcomb. Like if Holcomb's around and based on Omar Khan's comments, if the playoffs had gone on any longer, Holcomb could have come back. Even he said the same thing about Roman Wilson. So if the Steelers are okay with his contract, if they want to keep him and just deploy another rotation of linebackers, this is going to be very low on their priority list. I mean, maybe they would draft an off-ball linebacker late on day 3, or maybe they would just pick one up in free agency. Maybe they won't draft one at all. And so I can't imagine they'll have this will be high priority for them. But the defensive line group is just the opposite. They are going to draft a defensive lineman high. And I will say that confidently, barring what they do in free agency. Even if they go out and sign cut Ogunjobi, sign a big name free agent, they're still going to draft a defensive lineman high, I think, because they know that Hayward's 36, and they know that outside of Keanu Benton, there is nothing on this group to look forward to at all. You've got guys with expiring contracts that might not be back. You've got Ogunjobi, who isn't worth the money, and that's essentially the entire makeup of your D-line right now. Dean Lowry wasn't good. Montravius Adams wasn't good. Lauer Milk's a free agent and wasn't good. So DeMarvin Leal was, I mean, in the previous year was didn't get a helmet, and then last year landed on IR. And so this is a big position of need for them. I think that ideally they're going to look for that guy in the Hayward Tuitt mold, a guy that can be a base 3-4-N, that 4-5 technique that you can slide around your defensive line. But also, Shayne, I certainly wouldn't rule out the idea of them even spending that pick on a nose tackle, because they were bullied against the run late in the season and into the playoffs. And that's the type of player they're missing. Like we've said before, you've got to get Keanu Benton back into position that he is best playing at, because it's not nose tackle. I hope the Steelers recognize that. Do your opinions align with mine in terms of the D-line group?
Absolutely. This is too good of a group not to pull at least one player from early in the draft. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the first round, I think, but it most likely will be. I do think more and more I'm kind of leaning that direction, that, you know, unless the receivers really impress them, or something like the Genty situation happens where you're put in a bind of like, yes, we need defensive line. There's a bunch of good players on the board still, but it's Ash Genty. Like that's really outside of those situations. I do think that's where we're heading. And there's a ton of guys to watch here. You know, obviously Kenneth Grant's going to probably blow up the combine. Like this is a guy who moves way too good at 340. So he's a guy to watch. Derek Harmon, after dropping weight coming over from Michigan State to Oregon, became a pass rusher that was very, very much something that you didn't expect him to be. And now all of a sudden he is, and the run defense kicked around. So he's a guy that's very interesting to watch as well. Jamari Caldwell, his teammate, another smooth mover for as big as he is at 340 pounds. All these guys are guys you want to watch out for. Walter Nolan's of the world. Not really exactly what I think they need, but I do think he would be a good fit as like a 5 tech, right? Like that type of player where he can play a base end role because he is very flexible and he has really good speed and athleticism for that position. Omar Norman Lott's another guy. I want to throw a bunch of these names out. He's an explosive player, but he's also a good rotational guy later down the board. If we are looking at running back, linebacker, though, there is one linebacker name I want to throw out there specifically because if we don't retain Landon Roberts, which I hope we do, because his role is very important on this defense as a run stopper, despite how much the run defense kind of faltered at times last year. If we don't keep him around, a guy to watch at the combine to see how well he tests, and also is a true just thumper at linebacker. Kobe King out of Penn State. Probably going to be a D3 player because he doesn't have the coverage instincts and the coverage athleticism, but he's going to come downhill and hit you, and I think he'd be a really good run defender type. So I think if they do add to that position, it's going to come in the form of that type of player.
Yeah, Shayne, I don't disagree with that. And if we're looking at the most likely first-round prospects the Steelers are going to eye here, the top defensive line is Mason Graham. He's going to be gone. He's going to he will be off the board by that point. And then I think there's a group of three. I know some would argue that there's more than that who should be considered there. I wouldn't. If the next group of three is gone, I think I would probably look in a different direction. But that is Kenneth Grant, the big nose tackle for Michigan, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, and Derek Harmon. Harmon's super interesting because a lot of people have literally comped him to Stephon Tuitt, who retired very early, played his last snaps for the Steelers at 27 years old. How they've missed that player greatly over the last several years. He would be a good scheme fit in terms of that, a player in that mold that can move up and down the defensive line. Nolan, as we've talked about before, there are some off the field things that are going to surface here that I'm sure you will hear about soon. And so that could scare the Steelers away. I've been told that there are some teams that already have Walter Nolan off of their draft board. And so take that for what it's worth. And that could perhaps make him plummet a little bit in this class until a team is willing to take that chance on him. And so I think those are the guys that you are looking at. I think they'll all be really talented players. I think all three of them would be not only good value picks, but you'll be drafting a high positional need where the Steelers are right there. Now, things to look for specifically at the combine. You mentioned Grant. Grant is supposed to test really well. Some people have, I think it was Daniel Jeremiah, even gave him like the high end comp of Dexter Lawrence. And it doesn't get any higher than
physical
that.
potential is there.
Yeah. When you have that physical makeup of a 6'3 plus 340 pound guy that can move the way he does, it doesn't matter if Kenneth Grant is just a pure nose tackle with limited college production. He could very well be off the board even by the time the Steelers are on the clock at pick 21 because of the size, strength, and athletic combination profile that he's got going for him there. So I think that is something to watch for. Another guy to keep an eye on here that I really like, that I honestly don't think is getting enough buzz, is TJ Sanders, South Carolina.
Yeah.
He comes in a little bit smaller as like that 3-4 base end guy that you would want for the Steelers, that 4'5" tech. A little bit shorter, a little bit lighter, but he is strong. He's a really good run defender, and his film is awesome. And so personally, he would be the next best of that group. If I missed out on those guys and I still insisted on taking a D-line there, he would be the next best of that group for me. Tyleik Williams, he's a guy that probably isn't going to test very well.
He's a true nose tackle.
He's not going to offer you much as a pass rusher.
But he's
so you at least want him to see him not be a terrible athlete. Anybody else that you want to highlight, Shayne, in terms of guys? Deion Walker is another one too.
But
this is such a polarizing play. People have such varying opinions on him.
Yeah.
He looks the part. He's sloppy as all get out. But the flashes are really impressive, and obviously just seeing him is impressive. The guy that is 6'7" with long arms and physical gifts. We'll see how he moves at the combine there. We've got an age on him now. According to Pro Football Focus, Deion Walker is 20.9 years old. Young guy,
He's a young player. Yes.
So a multiple ball of clay, you would hope so at least, but a lot of work to be done with him. Anybody else that you want to highlight from this D-line group, Shayne?
Not specifically that we haven't talked about. Like I said, I think that all the top guys, interestingly enough, and it's basically a tie. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, I definitely firmly have him, but I do have Harmon as my top defensive tackle in the class, like interior player, ahead of Mason Graham, only based off potential. I think the potential of him is slightly higher, but Graham is a better player right now. So this whole defensive line group, like the first 4 to 5 guys, like all have like day one potential impacts for me. And even the guys we talked about past that, like Sanders is a really fun player to watch on film. I think he's a little bit erratic, but he uses that to his advantage and just kind of tries to run through the face of everybody that he sees. And that works when you're playing on the interior. Like, that's just something that you want to be able to do. Darius Alexander is an interesting one too, for me. out of Toledo. He got a lot of buzz at the Senior Bowl. I think he's going to test very well as well. I think he's a very athletic guy. Fits that like guy that can go up and down the line as a 5 tech. He played even a little bit of edge alignment at the Senior Bowl and still looked the part, which love to be able to see that. So just again, this whole like the first 10 or so guys in this class, if you were to rank them, like they're all true like guys who could make huge impacts in the first 2 to 3 years of their career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with your take on Harmon. Harmon is an electrifying player, even for his size profile when you watch him on tape. So if you've not watched Derek Harmon tape, put that on. Watch these top few guys here if you get a chance to before the Senior Bowl. But that next group, I know a lot of people argue, well, Darius Alexander's in play, Alfred Collins, Omar Norman Lott. I view all those guys as early day 2 prospects. I think
a lot of them
very well could fall between their first and second round pick. That would be a little bit rich for me. I think any of them at that point. I did hear too, although we don't have an official age on Darius Alexander yet. I know that he's old. I believe that he might be 25.
He's either 24 or 25, I think. That's
a big turnoff for me, especially for a first round pick. Day 2, I don't care if you're getting a talented player, but for a first round pick, if you're getting a prospect that's that old and from a small school, then it's a couple. It's I don't want to say it's red flags, but it's things that you need to. You want to eliminate risks in the first round too, and I think that would be adding to that a little bit, or at the very least, maybe not getting the most bang for your buck in terms of career longevity.
Right.
So those are, I think we pretty much hit every person that we wanted to highlight from that group. Keep an eye on them. Again, it's not just about their testing numbers at the combine. A lot of these guys won't even do some of the testing stuff, unfortunately. We're trending that direction where guys are going to opt out of running, and they'll just do their testing at the pro day, which I give credit to those who do it here.
It's a smart thing for a lot of these guys. I don't want to. This is not an anti-player thing for me, but the draft nerd in me wants to see these guys out there and do it.
Exactly. I want to be able to cross compare like across the years to see how they stack up, but watch how they move on field drills. I think that's really important.
That's the most important thing for sure.
Are they bendy? Are they explosive? Keep an eye on that. Let's move to the following day, which is Fridays, and that is defensive backs and tight ends. I know the Steelers probably won't have a lot of interest in a tight end, considering they've gave Freiermuth the contract. They drafted Darnell Washington in the 3rd round in 2023. But defensive backs, they're going to draft one, maybe 2. And so this is a position worth watching. Now, I put out the other day, Shayne, I put out my first round candidates that I believe, the guys I believe are on the Steelers radar right now. I did not include a defensive back, and people got on me with that. I'd be really, really surprised if they went there in the first round. I think it would have to take something like a Will Johnson slipping to pick 21 type of thing. Otherwise, I don't know if they view that as a big enough need in a high priority position enough to do that when we know this team has the recency bias. They were run on horribly at the end of the year and they couldn't pass the football. So I still think it's going to be defensive line, wide receiver. You put a gun to me right now. That's what I'm thinking it is, but there's always an off chance it could be one of these guys. Now, it doesn't mean don't watch the defensive backs, because they could very well take a defensive back on day 2 of the draft. I know there's a lot of guys that people like this year. Shayne, what is I know we're early here still in terms of the draft process, but what is your overall take like on this cornerback group specifically this year in the draft?
So I haven't gotten to full evaluations of them yet. I just finished interior defensive line. I'm moving on the linebackers and edges here these next 2 weeks. But I do think there's a couple standouts, obviously, at the top. And I think the problem is there's, at least from the small amount I've watched and also from the general consensus, is it's the top 2 guys, which is obviously with Travis Hunter and Will Johnson. And then you throw in a Malachi Starks at safety, because some teams I think are going to view him as this like truly difference making safety prospect because of his tape from 2023, especially. Others will say 2024 wasn't quite as good. How high can you take a safety nowadays? All that stuff. So that factors into his evaluation there. And then from there, it's how much do you value Jahdae Barron's contributions to Texas? How great he was on the outside for them. Do you think he can stick it outside corner in a lot of schemes? Or is he going to be this slot defender that admittedly is very valuable, but do you take him at 21 even? I think that's the question. So, and then you have injury guys. Benjamin Morrison, what's he going to look like after the hip injury? Savone Revel, like he's not going to be able to test, although we know he is an electric athlete. I don't really know if I care about that. he is an injury question mark, and he's a little bit of an older prospect as well, kind of doing the JUCO route and other things. So a lot of the guys who might be at 21 probably aren't going to be the best players available, or just have more questions than the rest of the defensive line group and receivers have.
Shayne, that's exactly where my thought process is right now. And I mean, obviously, if you view Travis Hunter as a cornerback, he's the top cornerback in the class. If you view him as a wide receiver, he still might be your top wide receiver in the class. He's that good. Yeah. So long gone. He will be gone in the first 3 picks of the draft. I mean, I'd be surprised if he makes it past the Giants. So, and then after that, you're looking at, all right, Will Johnson's probably going to go somewhere in there as well, just with his size profile, his ball production at Michigan. He would be honestly, Shayne, the only one outside of Travis Hunter, obviously, that I would be intrigued at pick 21. Jahdae Barron kind of doesn't do it for me. I don't know what it is, but if I'm looking at a guy who doesn't have the length and size profile that you would necessarily want for a boundary cornerback, but he played some boundary, he played slot over his career. I think there's a ton of value in that player. Don't get me wrong, but I just think it's a little bit rich to take that guy right there, as good as he is, to take that 23-year-old versatile defensive back. And I think the big thing for Barron is if he comes in sub 5'11", like that can kind of change up some opinions too. Like if he's like 5'10 and a half, 5'10 and 3/4, that could matter as well. A lot of teams have thresholds, especially on the boundary. Now he can play anything. You can ask him to do anything in the secondary. I still think he'll make a great safety at a good level
too.
Yeah, he would be. Yeah, he would be.
He's a tough one because I love the prototype of a player like him, because I think you go back to what Mike Hilton did for us in our defense whenever he was at his best for us, and not that he's exactly that type of player, but just a do-it-all defensive back who I think if he tests really well, which I don't necessarily think he's going to test out of this world, I think he's going to test well enough for teams that don't mind the size limitations at outside corner, because there are schemes out there, especially if you put this guy in a true off-man coverage scheme where you can read the eyes of the quarterback, where you can make plays on the ball from kind of off the ball. That's what you want him to be if he's an outside corner. I think as an inside player, you could stick him anywhere and he'll be great. I think that's kind of why I wonder how early he'll go, because unless the right team is picking high that values that type of outside corner, he might get pushed down the board a little bit. And then the team is probably going to get a steal though, right? So it's kind of the give and take of that. Now for the Steelers, I think he'd certainly be an inside player because of the prototype they're looking for at outside corner, but he would be a really good inside player for it. So he might be one of the best players available by the time 21 rolls around if he's still there, but I don't know if the fit is as good as it'll be for other positions. So.
Yeah, the versatility is going to be key with him, and it reminds me of another player, different player, obviously, and even a different position. But Brian Branch in the draft 2 years ago, where it's like you can do anything. I mean, you really could. You're that versatile in the secondary. You might not be the ideal fit in one particular position, but it's your versatility that makes you special. I think the same thing about Barron. For what it's worth, he played in 2023. He played 389 snaps from the slot and only 43 snaps on the boundary. This past year, though, he played boundary corner and he did a really good job with it. So that would be the one. I feel like if Travis Hunter will be gone, if Will Johnson is gone, Jahdae Barron would be that one that maybe could sway the Steelers there. I just think that their positional needs elsewhere are going to be too strong. And I kind of wish I valued that slot corner, do it all for you hybrid more than what I do. And maybe he'll be a boundary corner in the NFL. But I don't know. I don't know how I would feel about that pick right there. Some of the other guys to watch here: Trey Amos, another boundary corner from Ole Miss. Siobhan Revel is just such an interesting story overall. He's coming off of a season-ending injury, but he's tall, long, fast, small school
fits
corner.
The profile.
Fits the profile for sure. Darian Porter, you want the Porter and Porter combination.
He's going to test apparently out of this world too, which I'm really curious about. We'll see about that.
Azare Thomas, and Thomas is a good one. I mean, Thomas would be one.
He would be a great fit.
Intrigued me greatly in the second round. Yes. But in the first round, again, I still feel like it's too rich. Most of these guys you're looking at day 2 picks. Benjamin Morrison, another intriguing profile type guy.
With the injury.
So it is tough with it. The injuries always complicate things for sure.
We'll have to see what the medicals say on him, because that matters a lot for him.
It does. It absolutely does. Maxwell Hairston is going to be a guy. He was a guy who had a really good performance at the Senior Bowl. I thought a little bit lightweight for a corner. So there are some depth options here the Steelers could pursue as early as day 2 in the draft. Again, I wouldn't go in with the idea that they're going to draft one of these first round cornerbacks. I think that that's very unlikely if I had to say at this point in time. But we'll see what they do. Any other players from that position, Shayne, that you want to highlight here?
There is one I want to throw out as a potential third safety / slot potential type of player. Sebastian Castro out of Iowa, I think, could be an interesting fit for this team because I do think he can play safety and also corner as far as nickel corner specifically. Very instinctive player, not the most athletic guy, which, that's kind of what happens a lot of the time with those positions. You throw those guys who are smarter, aggressive players who kind of make up for some of the lack of athleticism with their brains. He's certainly in that mold. And I think, probably either late day 2, early day 3 type of pick, most likely, at least from my understanding with him right now, could be a really good option to compete in the slot for this team.
Yeah, Shayne, and the Steelers are going to want to at least cover their bases here.
Yes.
I think it's more likely that they spend decent money in free agency.
I think they should,
rather than drafting a cornerback high.
Yes, I think they should.
Like
looking at that, which we'll get to that for sure. But
a Byron Murphy type guy would be like perfect, exactly what they need. A guy that can, if they can play on the outside, can play on the inside, can do everything for them, do it at a high level. So we'll see what happens there. So that's Friday at the Combine. And tight ends, I mean, we won't spend much time on this from a Steelers perspective, but I do like a lot of the tight ends in this group.
Good tight end class.
It's a strong tight end class. Tyler Warren, man, if Steelers had not given an extension to Freiermuth, and that would be one that I'd be really intrigued by. He's one of my. I think I'm going to have Warren as my 5th overall player in the class, just as a pure prospect.
He'll certainly be in my top 10. I'm not sure if I'm willing to say any higher than that until I get through all the players, but I doubt he's outside of the top 10. He was a joy to watch at Penn State this past year. So
that would intrigue me greatly. Colston Loveland gets open like nobody's business.
Yeah, very athletic player, very good player.
Definitely a good tight end class. I think that we could see a lot of these tight ends go early, and I don't think the Steelers will have much interest in there. In fact, I would expect them not to even draft a tight end with what they've got going on right now.
Probably not. So. One guy to throw out there, just because it's the type of player that they love, is Jackson Haas out of Georgia Tech. Pure blocker. This guy, like when you watch the blocking drills, he's gonna be the one that's like, oh yeah, okay. Like, you're gonna notice him immediately compared to the
move the sled guy.
Yeah, not exactly like the only blocker types. I think some of the other guys can block, but I think he'll be noticeably different when it comes to the blocking stuff. But other than him, I don't think so.
All right, Shayne, let's move on to Saturday. Always the most anticipated day at the Combine, and that is quarterbacks, wide receivers.
Why would that be?
Running backs. Everybody wants to see the flashy guys, and we'll get a chance to look at them on Saturday. So let's start with the quarterback group here, Shayne. Hypothetically speaking, if a guy like Shedeur Sanders fell within range, do you think that the Steelers would even consider it this year, or are they pretty much out on a quarterback so they're going to go a different direction? They'll probably know that, honestly, based on what they do ahead of time. Would they be, if they had him high enough on their board, would they go and do something like that? Try to move up several spots in the draft? I think both of them will be gone well before that point. But what would you feel about that? And do you think the Steelers would even consider that idea?
I don't think they would this year. I don't think it's the year to do that personally. And I also think they probably feel the same way. But just based on how specifically Shedeur has handled the draft process, I have a feeling he's got a promise from someone inside the top 6 or so picks. Like I think that's what's going on here, because he's not throwing at the Combine. He didn't do anything at the Shrine Bowl. People can feel however they want about that. I would have liked to see him at the Combine at least compete a little bit. But I think that there's a reason why he's not. I don't think it's just arrogance. I don't think it's like Dion being, oh, you're too good to do that stuff. I think there's teams that have told him, like, hey, if you're at our pick, we're taking you. Could be the Browns, could be the Raiders, whoever, maybe even the Jets at 7. Point is, I don't think he's going to even fall in range for them to be able to do that. And I think Ward is also in the same boat where he goes somewhere in the top 6 as well. So.
Yeah, I think that will probably end up being the case. The big thing for both of those guys there, I want to see what their height comes in at. I know that you can be successful being shorter quarterbacks in the NFL. But if you come in sub 6'2", like anything that 6'2" is a threshold for me that I always like to try to meet at least. So if they come in shorter than that, how are they going to, what's it going to look like in the weigh-ins here real soon? I'll be intrigued by that. And then again, throwing, maybe neither of them throw. So that's the whispers out there right now. Beyond that group, Shane, because they're not getting Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, the Steelers are going to draft a quarterback. I feel very confident at some point in the draft. Like, I'd be a little bit surprised if it was day 2. I think it's probably most likely like the 4th roundish range, but maybe a 3rd round quarterback is within the realm of possibility here. Other guys, some of these guys, we know their size metrics. Like Dylan Gabriel is tiny, like he's 5'10", barely 200 pounds. Jalen Milroe has tiny hands. We saw that at the. I wonder if he's going to be doing the Kenny Pickett hand stretches.
He better
trying
to
improve that number.
That 9 mark.
Will Howard from Ohio State, championship quarterback. I know a lot of people like him. Jackson Dart's a hot name right now. I want to see how some of these guys throw, the ones that actually choose to do the drills. Right. How are you throwing at the Senior Bowl? Does it look like in these wide open situations, you hit the guys on target? Do you have velocity? All that kind of stuff. So be watching for that. The testing doesn't matter all that much for quarterbacks. If you move well on tape and you're not like some dual threat anyway, like as long as you're checking those boxes, that's what we're going to be looking for. Who intrigues you the most out of this group, Shane?
There's 3 guys I noted down for very different reasons for all 3 of them. I think the first one is Jalen Milroe, quarterback out of Alabama. I hope he tests in everything because I just need to know how athletic this guy really is. And I know there's been a trend of quarterbacks who are viewed a certain way because of athleticism, and then they choose not to test because they're like, I'm a quarterback. It doesn't matter what my testing is. I would implore Jalen Milroe to ignore that because you need to let teams know and show them just how athletic you are because it matters for a player like him who, if he's going to play it all early, it's going to have to be based on his ability to run with the football, to make plays in that area of the field, and hopefully the passing comes along. I think it's important to show just how athletic he is, to just kind of hammer home like, hey, if you take me, I do have this unbelievable athletic potential. So I think he's the first guy you have to see, and I hope he does all the testing just to show that. Will Howard out of Ohio State, you mentioned his name. I think that he's done about as much as you could do from about like the last couple games of the season through the playoffs as anyone could have possibly expected him to do in terms of raising his draft stock. The playoff games are definitely much better in terms of NFL stuff from him, from watching his earlier stuff. If he tests pretty well, which I think he's going to test pretty well for his size, like he is an athletic quarterback, just he's a little bit stiff, but not, lacking explosiveness overall. And then is from a throwing perspective, especially Kyle McCord out of Syracuse. I think he probably will put on, in my opinion, the best passing display of these guys if they all test and all throw at the combine.
Shane, my issue is similar to yours. I'm just not intrigued by this quarterback class, really. There's only a few guys that kind of catch my eye a little bit, and they're the same couple guys that catch a lot of the media's eye and the fan base as well. I know that you're not a fan of Jackson Dart because of the system that he comes from.
That's a part of that.
So, but he is a 21-year-old box checking quarterback who, if you can ignore the Lane Kiffin offense, which is really hard to do because they just really don't produce quarterbacks, but he checks a lot of boxes in terms of size and the production, all the stuff that he brings to the table there. I want to see how he does in these drills. Just Quinn Ewers, I just don't have any interest in.
Yeah, anymore. I mean, Ewers is not even on my radar anymore at this point. I'm just not interested in talking about him, frankly. It's become kind of a joke between some friends in mine at this point, where I'm like, he's technically QB like 8, but he's really QB 50 for me. I don't really care about him.
Does a guy get like? It felt like he got worse from like high school to now somehow.
I really think so. It's like I think he just never developed any semblance of like feel for the position. And the higher level you get, that becomes more and more of an issue. So it's like, I think that's kind of what happened with him. But
you mentioned Will Howard, and that's another guy that I would at least be intrigued by as a mid-round pick. I have a feeling Howard's going to go higher than I would feel comfortable taking him because of his pedigree. But the other guy is Tyler Shuck, who we've talked about before on the show.
Interesting guy for
just
sure.
Because of the tools. I mean, this guy was Justin Herbert's backup to show you how long he's been in college football and played for 3 different teams.
Yeah.
And he's 25 years old, but he has the size profile and a rocket arm that at least gets me intrigued to say, all right, you throw a flyer on this guy. Maybe this could be your version of like a Joe Milton or something that you could throw a day 3 pick on and see if it sticks. And if it sticks, even as a backup quarterback, it might be worth it. So keep an eye on it. And what I would watch for specifically is not so much the testing numbers, but do you notice a difference in velocity, how these guys drive the football here at the combine? I think the ones that are really driving it will show you that they're not just lofting it in there trying to make accurate passes. They're trying to do both. And so keep an eye on that. We've seen some really, really good combine performances that have lined up before. Like CJ Stroud was amazing during his combine workout. And so just keep an eye to see how those guys do. Moving on to the receivers here, Shayne. Big old position for the Steelers. I would be floored if they didn't address this within the first 3 rounds of the draft. I think it'll be even earlier than that. But I can see a situation as well where it's like maybe you go like D-line running back and then wide receiver in the 3rd. And for that to happen, I'm assuming they addressed wide receiver in free agency, right? Otherwise, I don't know if they can wait that long to do it in their mind, at least. But an interesting receiving class is probably how I would put it. I don't think it's a great receiver class by any stretch of the imagination. Mel Kiper Jr., just get off topic here for a second, recently had Steelers taken Emeka Egbuka at pick 21. At pick 22, he had Ted McMillan going there. I would be disappointed with that. If you're not taking McMillan over Egbuka, I think McMillan's just a better, more dynamic potential wide receiver 1 in the NFL. So I would be a little bit disappointed with that decision right there. Luther Burden, I want to see how he tests. The guy is explosive on film. He's a after the catch nightmare to try to bring down with his 30 broken tackles and elusiveness. Can he run routes? Like, is he going to have rounded off routes here because his route tree is pretty small? Egbuka, I've said before, Egbuka is a B+ at everything and not really an A at anything he does. I need to see that Egbuka is fast, but I heard that he might not run either, which is so disappointing. Like, I want to see these guys test. It sounds like there's a lot of Ohio State guys that might wait and test at their pro day. Matthew Golden, I want to see how he runs because I think that that's a potential X receiver in the NFL. But if you are like, to me, it matters. Like if you're a 4.47 or a 4.54, like that's a big difference in your explosiveness and speed. What can you do in the NFL? I want to see having these numbers at least helps us eliminate some of the risk in terms of guys in the first round. And so those are the guys I'll be looking at: Burden, Egbuka, Matthew Golden. That's the 3-headed monster at wide receiver potentially in play at pick 21. Shayne, what are your early thoughts on those guys?
So in general, like those are the 3 that you definitely need to focus on if you're the Steelers and if you're a fan of the Steelers. Those are the only receivers I think that could potentially be both available and in their wheelhouse as far as receivers in the first round, especially, right? Although we don't necessarily, me and you especially, don't think that it's highly likely that they take one. If the defensive line guys come off the board quickly, like they have to have a backup plan in the first round. I think that would be a receiver at that point because you're not going to see a run of both of those positions in front of them, I don't think. So if that ends up happening, they have to be prepared. Golden is my wide receiver 1 in this class personally, so I would love them to be focusing on him. But all 3 of these guys are guys I think make sense in different ways. Like Golden is the prototypical X-type route runner that I think would be able to come in and potentially be this team's receiver 1 ahead of Pickens in the first year or so of his career, year or 2. Egbuka is just so rock solid that you're pretty much guaranteeing this guy's going to hit. Like I hate to say that about players because you can't really say that, but there's not many players I could name that I'd be more surprised by not working out than Egbuka, right? Like that's kind of what it is with him. And then Burden's kind of the wild card of like, he is an electric athlete. He's going to be a great player in space. Can he do enough different things to be involved in an offense that just frankly isn't that great at throwing the football, right? Like it's kind of one of those things too with him. And maybe that helps him because you have to figure out a way to get in touches. So it helps make the offense a little bit more explosive. But those 3 guys are definitely the ones you want to focus on as potential round 1 options for this team.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment of those players, Shayne. And Igbuka is very like risk adverse here. Like you're hitting a double, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
With that pick,
pure double down.
So you're just hitting a double and probably nothing more than that. Golden intrigues me as that potential X receiver that you can funnel an offense through. Again, barring testing, like I'd like to see that he is a rock solid athlete there. Burden, I don't question his athletic traits really. I just want to see him in other facets there, the route running, that kind of stuff. So keep an eye on those guys as the first round candidates and how they come in here at the combine. Moving down the list a little bit more here. Jack Besh, like what's he going to test like? Jaden Higgins, potential candidate there. I know. Here's my prediction, Shayne. This is my general NFL prediction. Jack Besh is going to get drafted by the LA Rams. Like he's just the perfect offense for him to go to. He's that type of receiver that they look for all the time.
At this point, I'd be shocked if it wasn't a McVay/Shanahan tree guy at least, right? Like because it's just like copy and paste essentially with all of the guys that play that role. And it's like, hey, if you hit on them, you're going to
tough,
be really
physical. Yep, can do some yak stuff there. Jaden Higgins is a guy that really intrigues me. I kind of think that he's not getting enough buzz right now. I think that if you miss out on Ted McMillan, and a lot of teams will, this could be a nice consolation prize where you're getting maybe 90% of that same player. You're getting the big-bodied, long-arm wide receiver who can do a lot of things for your offense, maybe not be the most dynamic athlete. So his testing numbers could matter too. We'll see how he comes in here. He looks pretty fast to me on film. And so I'll see where he comes in. If he can crack 4.5, I think that would be amazing for him. I expect him to be probably around that range somewhere. Savion Williams, Shayne. This guy, he reminds me so much of like Cordero Patterson. It's wild. So I fully expect him, if he tests to test like an amazing athlete, it's just, can he play the actual position?
He should find new athletic tests to do out the combine if he can, just to show it. Like this is a guy that is purely like, all right, I'm just big, fast, strong, better than everyone I'm playing against most of the time. Now, can I play a position? I don't know. We'll find out. But I'll play something. I'll play get the ball to me, pretty much. Like that's kind of I have him squarely in the middle of my receiver rankings solely because I'm like, I don't know which direction he's going to go in terms of like what his role is going to be, how often he's going to be able to get the football. But every time I see him with the football, I'm like, that guy is better than the rest of the guys on the field. So it's like hard not to put him, higher, but I don't because I'm not sure with him. But yeah, he's definitely one to watch for sure.
I agree. He is. If you just watch his highlights, I mean, he'll captivate you for sure.
It's very
Isaiah Bond, Shayne, is another one. It's like, I don't know what to do with this guy. Are you Kadarius Toney, or are you better than that? Because he has the traits. He's got the athletic traits. So I fully expect some pretty amazing stuff. Testing wise, Tez Johnson the same way. You better test well if you are a little water bug like that. So, definitely some intriguing prospects to say the least here. And I think that it's very likely the Steelers draft a day 2 wide receiver this year if they don't get Burden, Igbuka, or Golden. So keep an eye on that group in general. Heck, the Steelers could double dip this year at wide receiver, Shayne. Even if it's not the deepest wide receiver class, I wouldn't rule that out because they have a lot of needs at that position right now. They
certainly do.
I mean, it's really like you're going into it with 3 guys on the roster. We'll see if Skoranek comes back for special teams purposes. But you might be able to afford to double dip there, barring what their moves they do in free agency here. And then running back, Shayne, we've talked about Genty. We talked about Ollie Gordon. Those are their formal meetings they've had so far. I fully expect some more formal meetings to come at the running back position. I bet they at least do their homework on Omarion Hampton, Caleb Johnson, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. Like I think that they're going to at least give a hard look at all those guys to see that, all right, who falls here? But would we consider anybody else besides Genty in the first round? First of all, I personally would not, as good as Hampton and Caleb Johnson are. I like them a lot. But to me, it's like I'm either taking the elite running back prospect in round 1, or I'm going to wait until day 2 on a really good running back class. In a perfect world, I'd love to be able to land like a Caleb Johnson or Travion Henderson in round 2. I think that wave of running backs is probably going to be off the board. But their testing numbers here, I think maybe could sway teams and kind of bridge the gap a little bit or widen the gap between how you view that next group of running backs there. Is there anybody else that intrigues you, Shayne?
I think those top guys are the most interesting because what range do they go in? Like, are they ahead of the Steelers in the second round? Do you even see a couple go in the first round because of how explosive some of these guys are and the difference makers they can be? It's kind of hard to say at this point. Like, because I'd love a round 2 running back if it's one of the best players on the board, which it probably would be if they make it to that point. But yeah, I don't really know if I can expect maybe either of the OSU backs to be at 52, maybe one of them. Caleb Johnson is a guy that I think if he tests really well, especially because he is that true, like he honestly reminds me a lot of Derrick Henry minus not being an absolute monster size person, which I'll still take that skill set if it's in any real format. But like all of them might be gone. And if that's the case, then you start getting into like the Devin Neals of the world, who I don't think is going to test super well, especially like in a straight line athleticism stuff, but is about as smart and like instinctive as runners you'll find in any class, especially this one. RJ Harvey out of UCF would be an interesting kind of like he's a little smaller than some of these other guys, but he plays hard. He's very explosive. Bashal Tutin has gotten a lot of love because of his performances in the All-Star games, and he's going to probably like if he runs, which I'm assuming he will, especially a guy like that should run, he might crack under 4.4, and that might boost him up a little bit for some teams.
Yeah, and for the testing wise, Shayne, these 40 numbers are going to be important for some of these guys. You look at a guy like Cam Scadaboo, like that is to me. I watched him on film. That is a 4.6 running back. If I ever,
I just wouldn't run if I was him, honestly. Unless he can crack under 4.6, I would just not run because teams love him for every reason except for how fast he runs. I don't know if he needs to show that.
Yes, I mean contact balance, all that stuff, really good, but. Yeah, you can really do some damage to your draft stock if you run poorly here. You run 4.64 or something that way as a running back.
Yeah,
you're going to get moved down the list.
I would just skip.
So Bashal Tutin, I fully expect to just blaze a trail with 4.3 something type speed. Travion Henderson, be interested to see if he does any testing because again, maybe these Ohio State guys, they're going to do it on their own field, which we've seen a lot. And that's why it is hard doing this primer, Shayne, because we just don't know all the players
for sure
choosing
what I was going to do.
Yeah. I wish it was one of those things like, all right, you sign up to come to the combine, you're doing these drills.
It'd be easier for us, right?
It would be better for us for sure. But we're going to give our primer anyway. Devin Neal's another one. If he runs, I want to see him run well enough. Like I know that's not his game.
He's probably a mid to high 4.5s guy. If I had to guess, like he's again the stop start quickness, the lateral agility is all there, but I think in a straight line, he's going to have a good 10-yard split, but then his 40 is probably going to be a little bit lower than.
I'm telling you though, Shayne, if you run like 4.6 or worse, your chances of being a really good running back, it drastically drops. It's like Ramondre Stevenson and nobody right now, and so. You want to see solid numbers, and sometimes we go like whole draft classes where guys don't even run in the 4.4s. It's like all 4.5s, and
running backs
after that,
typically don't run as fast as people think that they do. Yeah. And it's because they're not built to run 40s, man. Like you have to uncoil and do the whole. And these guys are usually rocked up like 5'9" to 5'11", 220. Like it's hard for them to do it, admittedly. So give them some grace there.
Let's move on to our last group here, which is the offensive line. If there's a day that you want to kind of just take off and chill and not have to watch the combine, it's the offensive line group this year. It's not a bad offensive line group by any means. I'm just for Steelers purposes,
the Steelers specifically, yes,
they won't draft an offensive lineman inside the first 3 rounds. You can jot that down right now. And I mean, over the last 2 years, Shayne. The Steelers have spent 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, a 4th-round pick on the offensive line. They've signed Isaac Seumalo to a sizable contract. They're just not going to do it. If they draft one, it's going to be 4th round or later, and it's going to be a guy who can either be a swing tackle. They do need a swing tackle, so keep your eyes. You want to watch the offensive line group. Look for a potential swing tackle type player for the Steelers. And then maybe a backup interior guy would be the only other thing I could see them doing. I don't think they do both. I think if they just draft one, and I think that's likely, they're going to draft a swing tackle this year, knowing that Dan Moore is going to be gone.
Yeah, that makes the most sense. There was 2 names I had jotted down. One who I just don't know at this point where his stock is at, but he is a small school player. So, and also it makes some sense in terms of just like what they could use as backup. And then another player who I've seen mocked as early as the 1st round, and I've seen outside of like 3-round mocks. So it's kind of hard to tell. Charles Grant out of William & Mary. offensive tackle for them, but going to be an interior player almost assuredly with his size profile. Probably long enough to be a tackle, but not necessarily big enough or just really built to do that. And Marcus Mbow from Purdue is an electric athlete, perfect type of scheme fit for this offense in that zone, like get out and move, get down the field type of thing. But probably going to be gone before the Steelers would consider him. But he could be a swing tackle type for them.
Shayne, you know, and I think you are too, we're suckers for these small school guys who perform really well and sometimes test really well. I had a
second-round grade on Mason McCormick for a reason. Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, you can go back to Alex Highsmith. Like that's to me is like the perfect type of like 4th-round pick. Yes. Now, I think he's going to be gone. I think that Grant will be gone before then probably.
I think so too.
If he wasn't, like that would be like a really high on my board. But I agree. I think that's where you're looking. Like the 4th round typically for me is a sweet spot to get the small school guys who are good athletes and played really well in college. I agree. Keep your eye out for some of those guys there. A good tackle class overall. Doesn't have the interior line like we've seen.
Yeah, a lot of the tackles are probably going to be guards is the thing too. So it's like, at least in the NFL.
They will. I mean, some of them are not going to hit those benchmarks that you want in terms of the length. Armand Membu, really good. Calvin Banks are going to be 2 of the top offensive linemen on my board this year. I've even had some people reach out to me, Shayne, and say, like, what about offensive line? Gray Zabel. And I'm like, I like them. I like these guys. Don't get me wrong. The Steelers are not going to do that.
Yeah, there's not going to be Steelers. Like, I just don't believe that. Yeah. Like they have to make some drastic change to something, or they have to trade somebody away or do something wild for it to even be a round 3 consideration, I think, right? Like that's kind of the problem with it. It's not really anything to do with this class. It's about just where are you going to play? Like if you're drafted that early, you're probably expected to play relatively soon. And where are you going to play with this line right now? So
it's true. I mean, it's not a possibility for this team. They're going to look elsewhere. We've been doing this for a long time. It's easy to follow their breadcrumbs. And offensive line is just not high on their priority list. I understand from their perspective why, because they've spent so many resources on it. Now you got to get to work. You got to find the right combination, the right 5 from left to right, and get it to work. Pat Meyer and Tomlin, and just do. I mean, however you can make this line work out. You've got enough talent on it now, theoretically.
Yes.
Now it's time to start producing some results here. And that would be our wrap on the combine, Shayne. I want to really briefly, because we've got kind of a long show going on here. I want to talk about the Matthew Stafford sweepstakes. And the Rams have granted Stafford permission to speak with other teams. It's very notable because Stafford, he wants another contract. He wants to cash in one more time. He's 37 years old, get one more big payday before he hangs up his cleats for good here. I can see him maybe playing another 2, maybe 3 seasons if he makes it one of those rare situations where you make it to 40 years old. I think Stafford's still a pretty good football player. I really do. You watch him like late in the season, in the playoffs, Shayne, in 2 playoff games just this year, even at his age. He combined for over 500 passing yards in 2 games and with 4 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, a passer rating of 105. He played well. He played well enough to easily take care of the 14-3 Minnesota Vikings before falling to the Eagles, which they at least were able to score on Philadelphia. They did a heck of a lot more than the Chiefs did even. And so are you intrigued by the prospect of getting a Matthew Stafford, knowing that he's old, knowing that you're going to have to fork up for him?
I think it just comes down to, are the Steelers truly in what we think they are in all the time, which is a true win now mode? Because if their goal in this offseason is how good can we make the 2025 Steelers, there is no better way to make this team as good as possible than to bring in Matthew Stafford for whatever cost it ultimately takes, because he, to me, on at worst, is still a top 8-ish quarterback in the NFL when he's healthy. Now, will he be that for more than another year or 2 maybe? I don't know. But he's been consistently that when he's been healthy and the team wasn't completely obliterated by injuries, right? Like when his team is remotely healthy and he's healthy, he's a great quarterback. And so far, he's already done this despite being so banged up. Why not why couldn't he keep doing it now, right? Like, it's kind of, this isn't like the Kirk Cousins thing where he's coming off a huge injury and you don't know what he's going to be. Like, if he's healthy, you kind of know what Matthew Stafford's going to be. Mm-hmm. So if they can make this happen and they can do the right things around that move and still make, good decisions and still maximize the roster, if you want to make a deep playoff run or at least be in contention to do so, this would be how you would do it.
Yeah, and the early reports are that his camp is looking for $50 million per season, which isn't unusual. I mean,
no, Dak's making 60. Like, who is?
Yes. So I would not get all bent out of shape over a couple million. If you think he's worth 45 or 50, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You got to do what you think is best for the franchise. Now, Stafford, tough as nails. He's going to stand in the pocket, deliver one strike after the next. We talked about, Shayne, how skittish Russell Wilson was at times, where he kind of just tuck his head and start bailing out of the pocket. Stafford's the opposite of that.
Yes,
I mean, he's going to hang. He's going to hang tough as he's delivering the football. He's going to take a big hit. So I'm intrigued by it. I think it would be a very interesting fit. Possible destinations for him, I think, could be basically any team looking for a quarterback. The Giants, the Raiders, you name it. He should be on their list. I think CBS had they just popped out a list here a little bit ago. They actually listed the Steelers as the number one candidate. Giants.
That makes sense because it's a combination of contention and probably can pay him. Whereas the other ones are like, they'll give you the money, which I think Stafford probably is focusing on that because he's got his championship. Not that he wouldn't want another one, but I think he wants that final payday. So all the teams, like you said, are kind of in contention, I think, for this.
Yeah, Raiders. Vikings is interesting. I just don't know if they're not going to double redshirt McCarthy. Like, I think that's going to be their quarterback. But
the only reason they would do that is if they're like, you know what, we just don't think JJ is ready to play. And if that's the case, he is a young player. You could do it because, I mean, look what Jordan Love with the Packers, how long he waited to play. And granted, that's had some very good but also mixed results at times. But at least he had a chance to sit and learn. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, and we talk about, should the Steelers do this, Shayne? To me, it's a resounding yes. Like, if this is on the table for you, and I said the worst thing that you can do is run it back. You can't do the same thing next year and expect different results. So to me, it's like, typically I'm against this. Like, I think there's chances and chances over the years to get a franchise quarterback or to start the rebuild for the next era. Since the end of Ben until now, they've missed all those chances because they live in the present. We know that they do that. Tomlin does it. Art Rooney does it. If you're going to continue to live in the present, do it with a quarterback that gives you the best chance of competing for a Super Bowl. Stafford is that guy this year among all the quarterbacks that could potentially be available. He is that guy. Now, if it costs you a first-round pick and a second-round pick or a first-round pick and the third-round pick plus $50 million, I think the compensation is almost irrelevant at this point. You've got a Hayward who turns 36. You've got Watt who turns 31 during the season. You have to win now. This is, if you want to crack the window back open a little bit longer, he will give you a 2-year window, I believe, to do that. And then after that, it's like, all right, full on rebuild. Steelers probably won't do it because they never do. But maybe Tomlin will be gone by that point, Shayne, and maybe they would be more willing to. We'll see. Maybe Tomlin will go on forever with this team.
Who knows?
But I do think that I would feel significantly better about Steelers chances to win a playoff game, first of all, and chances to maybe even compete for a Super Bowl if you had Stafford compared to Justin Fields or Stafford compared to Russell Wilson.
Yes. That's the thing ultimately with this is, again, I don't want to say you because you said it, but I agree with it for the most part, but like, it's hard to say that compensation is relevant. Obviously, you don't want to give up the farm for a 2-year window. But that's what this team has told us they want to do. They don't want to build for the future. So if you're constantly telling your fans and us and the media that, like, hey, every year is about that year. It does not matter. 2026 doesn't matter until 2025 is over, and so on and so forth. Then put your money where your mouth is at this point. Like, if you're Art Rooney, if you're Omar Khan, like, make the big swing. Get the guy that isn't necessarily the future of the team or isn't necessarily going to make this team great for 10 years. But if he's going to make you a Super Bowl contender potentially, or at least a deep playoff contender, do it. I don't know what it's going to cost, because of his age and everything else. It maybe won't cost anything more than like a day 2 pick. It might not cost this or that. But that, again, shouldn't really be the main factor here. If this is truly the direction you want to take your team, he's going to give you the best chance. No one else comes close in terms of ceiling because of how good he already is and what you're going to get from a Matthew Stafford. So if they're going to do this, they should already be like, it should be happening like soon, in my opinion. Like they should be like, this is what we're offering, take it or leave it, like that type of thing. Beat the rest of the teams at the punch, but I just don't think they will.
Yeah, and we all know the number one the number one thing that this team needs is a franchise quarterback. That's not going to be resolved this year. There's nothing more important than that. But if you are to live in the present, and if you are going to operate with the mentality that they operate with, which is this is the season that matters, then you might as well take that big swing, go out and get the best possible quarterback that you can get, and then worry about the rest of it later. I know that he might be past his prime at this point. I still think it's the best possible option that they could run with. Shayne, is there any other thoughts that you wanted to add on that before we wrap up today's show?
No, I think we've both given plenty of thoughts on really everything we talked about today. I think the Combine, obviously, everybody check that out. It's a fun event. I know we talked about how, like, oh, we wish more guys were testing, but it is what it is. Watch the guys that do go out there. They're trying to make their money, trying to show what they can do. And there's going to be plenty of things to watch, so definitely do that.
Yeah, keep your eye on the Combine. We will have a recap show next Wednesday, and we'll talk about anything else that drops between now and then. We go live on this show every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Also check out Josh Yorsh's show on Mondays. Thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on X at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on X at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain Steelers podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.